A lot of people move to France thinking that one day they will feel French. In fact, they might already feel French despite having never set foot in France, and I can certainly identify with that as somebody who's lived in France 3 times now. This time I've been here for over 8 years, and I got my French citizenship last year, and yet I don't know that I will ever actually feel French. I do feel French in some ways, and I certainly don't in others. And today I wanted to talk about why maybe assimilating in France is a little bit harder than you think it is, and why maybe you don't want to fully assimilate in France, which is gonna get me in some trouble, but that's all right. That's what we're here to do today. I also want to make a quick disclaimer to say that this is coming from my experience in living here. A whole lot of friends that have moved here, that have integrated to varying degrees. I've seen quite the spectrum of it. Of course, so much of my experience is in Paris, the vast majority of it. I've lived in Nice, I've seen a lot of the country, but I've spent most of my time in France, in Paris, and as we all know, Paris is not France. So I'll try to keep that in mind, and if there are any nuggets in there that I need to toss in as far as like the experiences being different, that's actually a very important point to make, because as we'll see as we talk about this, Paris is kind of at the center of what it means to feel French in the modern sense, which is why a lot of the rest of France does not like Paris. In fact, a lot of French people kind of hate Paris and Parisians, and there's a long history to that. It's not just because they won the Champions League this year. Oh no, PSG fans are not at the root of all evil when it comes to being Parisian. I didn't mean to talk about that too much, but we'll probably have to get into it now that I've opened that door. Let's jump into this. Just a forewarning, this is gonna be oversimplified as we dive into this. There's a bus that just pulled up on the other side of the roundabout right now, which I have to show you because it kind of encapsulates this perfectly. It looks like it's from Germany, and yet somehow it's offending the pigeons from across the street. If we're gonna understand what it means to be French, we have to go back to the idea of the nation state, because France is basically the founding of the nation state. The concept came about and was begun as a project in the 18th century, 19th century. There's this development of this idea of being a nation. And if you live within that border, you are French, or you are American. This can be seen in existing identities that are still alive within France. Everything from the Basque, in the Basque country, up in Brittany, they have a very strong sense of identity. The Niçois still have a sense of identity. There are different groups that actually used to speak different languages. The Basque still speak Basque and still hold on to a very strong identity. That is, they are Basque first. Corsicans feel very Corsican before they feel French. This is still alive and well today, but going back a couple of hundred years, French, the language as we understand it today, was not spoken by the majority of French people as we understand them today. The Académie Française is an actual body that governs the French language, and they made it their goal to extinguish all other languages within the French territories. This ties back to the Republican project and successive revolutions, and you can understand why teachers were seen as the front line of the Republic, because they were going out and trying to teach kids what it meant to be French, and a lot of that meant beating the language out of them. Like whatever their home language was, whether it was Occitan or Nissar, which is Niçois, basically like a dialect of Occitan. Whatever language it is that they spoke, they were there to beat it out of them, which is kind of actually tragic. As much as I'm like pro-democracy, pro French Republic, that is a kind of a darker element to the history that actually ties into why people may not be such big fans of the cultural dominance that radiated from Paris. But as a result, still, not all modern French people feel French, like not French first. And there are degrees of that you see, that I run into just in talking with French people. I think it's easier to pinpoint this on the extremities. So if you look at like Corsicans, who famously are like Corsican first, and we make a lot of jokes about them blowing things up because they used to do that. And they really do not want mainlanders, they don't want French people, outsiders coming to Corsica. They want to keep that for themselves. The Basque country is very similar. If you go to Biarritz, you're not going to feel that. Biarritz is like, the Paris of the South, as a lot of people will say. It's very much inhabited by international people, Parisians, outsiders. And I love the Basque country. I really, really love going and visiting. But the farther into the hills you get, the less welcoming they might become to outsiders. These are things that you will feel that are the overheld resentments of being forced to exist within the nation state, to being forced to be French. And so they hold on to their language and their culture, and they push back. You can still sense this in the relationship people have to Paris. I feel like that's actually kind of more the modern version of this, and we're gonna get to why you'll never be French here soon enough, don't worry, we're building up to it, and why I might not ever feel fully French myself. I think you're probably getting an idea here when so many people come to Paris to work, because France, the way that it was developed, Paris is the center of all axes. It's kind of like the all roads lead to Rome thing. Paris has centralized itself in power and infrastructure, but also for jobs. There are so many people that come to Paris to work, and their whole goal is to start their career here, make whatever money they can, and then hopefully find a job somewhere else. I have met so many French people who do not want to be here, who are just here to work and want to leave. And early on, I didn't really understand that because I just wanted to be in Paris. I was so excited to be here. I could not understand why anybody wouldn't want to be here. And now I get it much, much better. There are a lot of French people who have a very love-hate or hate-hate relationship with Paris as a result because they feel forced to be here. So much of the money, opportunities, everything is funneled through this city, and it stands as kind of that representation of inside and outside. Like if you were born in Paris, if you were raised in Paris, if you have the opportunities here, if you feel Parisian in a way, it often ends up becoming a very us versus them vibe of Parisians versus the rest of France. And this actually also begs another disclaimer, which is that we're speaking in generalizations right now, and I cannot speak for all French people. I can't speak for French people, period, right? Like I cannot speak for their experiences so much as I can explain how I've observed it from the outside. There are definitely going to be French people who do not feel the way that I describe about Paris, who live outside of Paris. And there are going to be a lot of people who have very different experiences because obviously we're all individuals, we all have our own unique experiences. But hopefully some generalizations and my observations will help you, like they're helping me as an outsider, to understand a little bit better what you're stepping into when you step into France. So the relationship between Paris and the rest of the country, I think, is actually a decent mirror for what the French experiment represents to a lot of people. And it does engender a lot of resentment, and there's a sense of being forgotten by a lot of French people. It is what has led to things like the Gilets jaunes movement, and you'll see farmers come in and block traffic with their tractors to remind Paris that, hey, you need us. We actually are very important, and they are. I actually love the tractor protests. I think they're one of my favorite protests. And even more locally, like Parisians, feeling Parisian is delineated by whether or not you were born within the périphérique. There are a lot of people that I meet who were born in the greater Paris area who are very self-aware and self-conscious of the fact that they are not Parisian, despite that, like, I would think of them as Parisian. If you were born in like Neuilly or Saint-Denis or Villejuif or even like Saint-Cloud, I would think of that as being Parisian. Like, why wouldn't that be? But there's a very strong distinction made. Like, if you were not born within the périphérique, if you were not raised here, then a lot of people do not see you as Parisian. And if you say, I'm from Paris, or I was born in Paris, people will ask you, what arrondissement were you born in? And that's immediately when people are like, well, I was born outside. There's a lot of challenge to your sense of identity naturally built into how we talk about where you were born in Paris. And I know that that's like a very Paris-specific reference, and it's a huge part of my life, obviously, but I think it illuminates that ongoing battle. It kind of brings us to what it means to assimilate versus what it means to integrate. And I found this really great paper that was written by the Robert Schuman Foundation. It's a foundation I did not know existed until I started doing a little bit of research on this. But they talk about how there are different models of assimilation and how France is actually the pinnacle example of assimilating, like the desire that you would shed all identity and become only French, whereas you have Canada on the other side. I thought that was interesting. They highlighted Canada as highlighting the multicultural approach of bringing people in, trying to maintain our distinctions and our differences while also adopting a common identity as being Canadian. I say our, I'm not Canadian, but you know, I'm sure there will be Canadians that comment on this in the post below, so you can go engage with them if you're curious to know a Canadian experience. They talk about how in modernity this has shifted quite a bit, how in the last 30 to 40 years, because of how geopolitics, modernization, globalization has gone, neither of them are nearly as extreme as they were at one point or another, and how France has given up the language of assimilation, which is to basically just wipe one's identity and become only French, and they talk more about integration. But France is still anti-communitarian in a sense, and this is an ongoing political discussion right now. There's a good explanation below about communitarianism that I found an article with The Local that kind of explains the political implications of it better than I'm going to here, but my understanding of it is that this is why we don't have something like a Chinatown, or why even in the Marais, we'll call it the gay or the Jewish district, but there's not like an area that's officially that. Like, communities are not allowed to organize and identify themselves outside of being French. You have to be French first. And anything that tries to assemble and identify itself in a way that might supersede your Frenchness is tamped down, discouraged, I don't know if it's actually illegal. I don't know where the lines are drawn on this, and that's where I need to actually do a little bit more research myself. But it is where you'll see, like, nope, they draw some real lines here. So even though there are neighborhoods that we refer to as being like the Chinatown of Paris, that's not allowed. Whether it's through language, through schooling, and we could talk about schooling at some point, because man, it can actually, it's brutal in its own ways, the French school system. There are things to take from it and love, and things that I taught in multiple schools in France, and like, oh man, yeah, having kids, putting them through French school, there's a lot to dig into there as well. Ultimately, the goal of assimilating in France is already pretty difficult when France hasn't fully assimilated itself yet, if that makes sense. And so for anybody coming in from the outside wanting to become French, like I personally do feel French, and I have a sense of ownership in this country because I've put my time in, I've paid my taxes, I've gone through the process, I've gained the citizenship. I even just got a letter from the mayor that she was kind enough to have her name printed on. It looks like a signature. It's not a signature, and actually it's a letter trying to get me to join the city's newsletter. But she still congratulated me on becoming French because she was born in Spain. Not the same thing, but at least she was, she's had some of that experience. There's an ongoing discussion within France right now as to how much we should accept and embrace the multicultural element of what it is to be French. Parisian especially, Paris is very multicultural, but France as a country has always been the crossroads of Europe in so many ways. Has a lot of German influence, Italian influence, Spanish influence, English influence, British influence, I should say. There is so much going on here that trying to claim an identity as French begs the question, what does it actually mean to be French? And that is a question that I'm not qualified to answer, and I don't know that I have an unqualified answer. But I can say that as somebody who's lived here for so much of my adult life now, and has become an adult, has built a business here, has built a community here, and has so many friends here, I will also never fully shed who I was before and the Americanness that I bring. I actually wore this hat kind of intentionally just to troll the random people that have never seen my channel before that are going to come across this and be like, why would you listen to some American talk about being French when you can't even stop wearing baseball hats? And to that I would say, how many French people do you see wearing New York Yankees hats who have no idea that it's not New York that logo references? But all that to say that maybe you could come here and build a life for yourself where you do feel French in whatever way that means to you. I think what I'm trying to forewarn is that just because you could attain that doesn't mean that you might always feel embraced or accepted as French, and that can be a threatening thing to some people. It's not to me. The funny thing is that I've embraced the fact that I will never be French in the sense that I don't have the same cultural references. I didn't grow up watching the same TV shows, cartoons. I still don't really watch French TV. I don't really watch TV, period. There are certain elements of French culture and history that maybe I won't ever really catch on to. And there'll be references that are made that will go over my head. And my language is great, but maybe my French will never be truly bilingual. Maybe I'll really set aside the time to get it to that next level someday. But also, I don't know that it has to be. And at the same time, like I said, there are things that I want to maintain. I've become very Parisian, probably more than anything. I don't know how French I am. I'm probably very much more Parisian. I'm a very bobo Parisian. If you don't know what that is, you're gonna see comments about it below, so you can go check that out. But I'm okay with that. It's kind of the same thing as wanting to live in New York or London. It's not the same thing as becoming British or American. It is a very multicultural experience, and it is nuanced in that way. And what I bring to the table then is something from the outside. Whether that's the fact that when I'm crossing the street, this is a Parisian thing. I don't think that people do this in the rest of France, but you'll see people when they cross the street do this. I have the right to be here, which is a very, at least Parisian, if not French thing, j'ai le droit d'être là. They'll tell the car to stop like this. I will always thank the car instead. I'll be like, hey, thank you. I'll still put up my hand too, but in a thankful way. I will train my staff to an American level of customer service. That is my goal. We obviously have our own take on what that means, but the stereotypical customer service in this city has a reputation for a reason. I just ran into some of that just the other day, which reminded me of this. I can bring something to the table when it's no, this is how I want to treat the people that come our way as far as customer service goes. I think it's important to maintain my English and actually make it more available to the French people. There were a lot of people that made angry comments on the video I made about things you have to get used to in living in France. And while I absolutely think you should learn French if you want to live here, and if you want to become French, you need to learn French, like just legally. You have to actually speak a certain level of French to become French. At the same time, the common language, the language of trade, so much of what's happening in the world today does require a level of English. I'm not going to give up my English. I'm not going to stop speaking English and let that deteriorate, because I do want to participate in a global economy. Most of you watching this are probably American. So if I stop speaking English, I'm going to lose access to my entire audience. So I'm not going to give that up. Speaking of the school stuff, I'm also not going to give up my sense of ambition. There's a thing in French culture, this is a generalization, but in French culture, there's a suspicion around ambition. Like, what makes you think you're so special? Why would you think you can rise to this level? And on the one hand, I think there's actually a very healthy side to this, where the French, I feel like, are generally more content with what they attain in life than the average American. I think Americans are often looking really high and will never be content, because they will always continue moving the goalposts beyond what they might actually be able to attain. Whereas a lot of French people get a particular job and are just chill to ride that out for a while, in a way that I really admire. Not everybody, obviously, but I link this back to the school thing, because you'll notice in schools, French kids get shamed for making mistakes, get shamed by their peers for standing out, hammering down the nail that stands up, kind of a thing. I've seen this in real time in a variety of different schools at a variety of different levels in different parts of the country. And this is really pernicious, I think, also because a lot of kids that are raised in the banlieue, in the suburbs of Paris, are straight up told they'll never have a future. They're straight up told you're not going anywhere in life, so don't even try, which I think is tragic. I worked in the banlieue in Paris for a year, and I tried to do the opposite. I tried to build those kids up and tell them they had a future and they could go and do whatever they dreamed of. And I have no idea if that had any impact whatsoever. But that's the kind of thing that I don't want to give up on. I don't want to give up on some American optimism and that sense of go get it. If you have a dream, go after it. That's something I'm never going to give up on for myself or for others. So there are going to be people that argue that not all French people give up on their ambition. That's very true, obviously. More power to them. But culturally, from what I've seen, especially at the school level, and you see it play out in interactions across the board outside of that, there are certain things that play out as far as what role is set for you in life, where you're expected to go as a result, and how you're expected to stay in your lane, that I don't personally accept and I don't intend to change on. So in that way, I'm not here to assimilate, I'm here to integrate, and I have integrated. I'm here to give as much back to this city as I can in particular. I want to obviously get out into the rest of France more, experience that, share that with you. It's the reason I got my French driver's license. It's the reason I want to buy a car at some point and actually road trip and go see more of the country. I obviously can do that by train. Our trains are amazing, we talked about that. But Paris in particular has given me so much, and I see where I stand as a French citizen, as a man, as a person, as just wanting to not only leave the world better than how I found it, but I want to leave Paris, this country, I want to leave the world with the sense that I gave more than I got. And that's how I see being a citizen at this point. How do I give more to France than it has given me? And that might be a lifelong journey. It may take me a long time to do more good than I've received, but that's how I see it. And that's as far as the integration or the assimilation is going to go, because I'm not going to change my name to Jacques, and I'm not going to stop speaking English and adopt a whole bunch of French stereotypes as my personality. I'm going to just be me, and I'm going to do the best I can to be a contributor to French society and American society. I'm not abandoning America. Obviously, I'm serving as a bridge between worlds here, but that's how I approach France and French citizenship. And I wrote in here, it's funny, because as I was taking notes and I was just kind of walking my way through understanding a little bit of the history and some of the greater context of what it means to be French, I suppose. All of the inner turmoil within the French sense of identity, without any outsiders even coming in to begin with. I wrote this line, so now you think you can just move here and feel French? And I think that kind of sums it up, is that thing of I hope you do. If that's your goal, if you want to move here and you want to feel French and you want to live a French life, whatever that looks like, more power to you. I think it's just that thing of there are a lot of people that move here that don't take the time to understand or respect the culture they're stepping into. And it can be very difficult to ever fully understand any culture, let alone our own, to wrestle with who we are, where we belong, where we come from. This is an ongoing part of the discussion of the national projects that we have in the modern nation state. And it's a bigger question than I can answer in a single video. But I think if anything, I would hope that this video helps to serve to tamp the brakes a little bit for anybody who's walking into France or any other country, assuming that they understand it all from the outside, and that maybe it's not just a lifelong process of coming to better understand it from the inside. This is where I stand today. I'm gonna keep learning about France, its culture, its people. I'm gonna continue to integrate and become more French, I'm sure. And I imagine that by the time I die, I will have learned a lot and I will understand a lot more than I do now. But it is not my goal to die having felt like I became French. But I hope that when I die, France looks at me with a sense of gratitude that I did come here and that I did make that effort. Whether or not it accepts me as one of its own, it's not really what I'm worried about so much. I just want to make sure that when I die, I leave this place a little bit better than I found it. If I can have that impact, then I've done my job. Thanks to today's patron producer, Renee Cantor, and all my patrons for making this possible. If you'd like to support me, my channel, that is the most consistent, ongoing, best way you could possibly do it. But thank you again for watching. I know I touched on a lot of things in this video and it's probably less directly consumable, but if there's a particular subject you want me to dive into, make sure to leave a comment on that below. I already have a bunch that I'm gonna talk about here soon. And I'll see you bright and early one of these mornings sometime soon for maybe a nice view like this. Maybe I'm gonna be back in my room, you never know.